Now, Executive Suites with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi.
Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. Always glad to have you with us. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about one of the most storied industries in Rhode Island history, textiles, which is now being reinvented. And there's actually a new group trying to bring together a number of the companies that are surviving and thriving in textiles to look forward for the industry. And we're going to talk a bit about how that's going. But first up, we're going to talk a little about the business of sports. And these are always interesting conversations to have. I'm joined today by Bob Driscoll. Bob is the athletics director of Providence College since 2001, right?
2001,
Getting a couple years under your belt over there, and also an associate vice president at the college. So, Bob, thanks for being here.
Nice to be here, Ted.
Obviously, I think everyone who lives in Rhode Island has heard of the Friars, probably at some point in their lives. But can you give people who may not know, you watch over all the athletics, not just basketball and the stuff that gets some network attention. Tell me about the full scope of what you're watching over as athletics director.
Well, we have 350 student athletes, which represents 10% of the students at Providence College. We're in the Big East, which is arguably the best basketball conference in the nation, and we play in Hockey East as well, which is one of the top in the nation. And we have a clearly defined vision. We want to be the most respected program in the nation, where we graduate all of our student athletes and compete for championships. So it's an important role. We use sports to teach the core values of hard work, dedication, and commitment, so they can go out when they graduate to be successful people in the world. So it's a great opportunity to really enjoy being around young people and also compete.
PC synonymous with especially basketball, also hockey. They've had a pretty good run the last few years, huh?
Well, we're the only school in the country that's been to 5 NCAA basketball tournaments in a row, 5 NCAA hockey tournaments in a row. And if you look at our great coach, Ray Tracy, he's been to 25 NCAA tournaments in their own cross country, and a school for 3,800, and you're competing against a big time school. That's pretty impressive.
That must be just add a level to excitement to a program to have that kind of success, and to be able to sustain it over, because you're turning over all the athletes and the students every fifth year, I suppose, or close to it.
Yeah, well, it's difficult because you have to reload, but success breeds success, because we've got this great brand now thanks to Fox, right? Every one of our games are on national television, so you have millions of eyeballs on these games, and Providence is the smallest school in the country competing at the highest level, so it's a really unique program. We're not like a Michigan or a Notre Dame or a University of California. We're a small school, but competing at the best at the athletic and academic areas.
So when you took over PC Athletics in 2001, every time you read a story, sort of a history of the last couple decades at the college, you hear did not necessarily have the financial and fundraising base that people who wanted athletics to be strong at PC needed. That was a clear mission to you, was to build that up, and you've had some success there. How big a challenge has that been, and kind of why was it so important when you came in?
Well, it was about changing a culture. We were one of the great leagues in the country with the Big East, but we hadn't really invested in it. We kind of took it for granted. And at the University of California, a big part of my job was enrolling people to support us. Small schools like Providence College, which is a tuition-driven institution, can't afford to put the multi-millions of dollars into the athletic program that's required. So when I first came here, I basically went to the community and said, you love big-time athletics. We want to be champions. This is Friartown. This is Providence, Rhode Island. We need your help. So it's about relationship building, and then as we started with baby steps and building complexes and having some success, people bought in. Now you look at where we are right now. We've raised over $100 million to build all of these brand new facilities, which is as nice as any in the country. But a lot of the support comes from season ticket holders and donors and alumni. So we've been really blessed, but you have to return on that investment to make sure you're successful.
How much more of a challenge do you think it is as a major program without football? You read at other places that football can be such a revenue driver for the athletics department that can also help to, the rising tide lifts all boats, and it helps basketball, it helps the other ones. You have to do it without football.
Well, I think it's an advantage. I was at the University of California. We had football, and it took 90% of our resources and time. I think the fact that the Big East has won 2 out of the 3 national championships at Villanova, and 60% have been in the NCAA tournament. If you're basketball-centric, I'm not dealing with 115 student athletes in football that cost $30 million a run. And there are very few programs in the country that actually make money on football. If you look at anything out of the Power 5 conference, they're losing millions of dollars. So it's not a return on investment if you're involved in football, unless you're in one of those 5 Power 5.
So a bit of a myth maybe that those big football programs are necessarily going to lead to a huge profit effectively for the rest of the program.
Well, the big ones like Alabama do and Miami do. You know, I'm talking about the top 25 in Notre Dame. But once you get beyond that, I think if you look at their ledger sheet, most of them probably end up losing money.
So you're talking about renovations a little there. One of the biggest projects is this new Rhode Friar Development Center, named for Rhode, who's a real estate guy up in Boston, who's been very good to PC in recent years. Kevin McNamara had a good piece in the Journal about highlights from the new facility. It even has its own barber shop. Tell us a little about what's special about this place and why you're excited about it.
Well, we're the last school in the Big East to do it, so we had an advantage. We traveled to every school in the Big East and took all their big ideas. We went to the Olympic training site and took some of those, went to the University of Oregon. But we had to build something that was a unique niche for us. And a lot of our young men are men of color, African-American men, and believe it or not, it's difficult to find a good spot to get your hair cut. So we thought, how cool would that be to have a little barber shop in there? We have some really cool high performance. We have the cryogenic machine, which I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's liquid nitrogen, and you can go in it for 2 minutes. It reduces your body temperature, so it's like sitting in an ice bath for about an hour. I don't know if you ever sat in an ice bath for an hour, but it's not a pleasure.
It doesn't sound comfortable, yeah.
So this one, in 2 minutes, you can flush all your lactic acid out. We have meditative rooms, we have orthopedic rooms, we have nutritionalists. It's a pretty cool spot. So the idea behind it is recruit the best student athletes, give them the best support structure so they can graduate, and if you want to play in the NBA, we're going to try to help you get there.
So overall, the investment in facilities, Ruane's is the most recent one, but there have been other big projects, right, that have been important since you took over.
Well, we've renovated or built brand new facilities for every single one of our student athletes. We won the national championship 5 years ago, and 2 years before we won it, we built a brand new renovated Schneider Arena. So I tell people all the time, you have one chance to make a first impression, and when a young man or woman comes in and they see that you have a beautiful campus and first-class facilities, that's a differentiator for you compared to your competition. And then if you show that you can compete for a Big East or a national championship, you know, you can steal a lot of the big-time student athletes away from the high-profile schools. So we've been able to do that and create a nice niche for ourselves.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Bob Driscoll about what's going on at Providence College athletics and how you balance the academic mission of the college with the athletic mission. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. Later on in the show, we're going to hear from the head of the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network about what's happening in one of Rhode Island's most storied industries, which should be interesting. But right now, very pleased to continue the conversation with Bob Driscoll, the athletics director at Providence College since 2001. We're talking a bit about the business of collegiate sports. Bob, you talked earlier a little, you mentioned that part of your mission right off the top is to have a program where the students succeed academically, and where, you know, we have seen, and you know it better than I do, some schools with not only lackluster records on that front, but sometimes scandals, whether it's cheating or whatever it is. Do you think it's a hindrance that PC places an emphasis on, you know, getting your students through with a good education when some other places maybe aren't taking that as seriously?
I think it's a distinct advantage. I mean, the public, most people are not happy with when you see what's happening at schools like Ohio State or Maryland, where a young man died because they didn't treat him the right way. I mean, really, first and foremost, this is about education. You have a better chance of being a neurosurgeon than you do being an NBA or an NFL player. So our focus has to be on graduation and education. I'm really happy to say we graduate 92% of our student athletes, which is in the top 1% of the country. Our regular students graduate at an 85% rate. So our student athletes are actually graduating at a higher rate. We're not doing our job as educators and we're not ensuring that. So winning is important, but not at the cost of not graduating our student athletes or treating them disrespectfully. That's first and foremost. And I think there's a niche for that. I mean, the Dukes of the world are doing it, Providence is doing it, Villanova, everybody in the Big East is doing it. And I think in our day and age, we need that more than ever before. What
do you think makes what stands out to you as an intervention or a way that you handle balancing? Because these students, I mean, I can only imagine what life is like for a PC basketball player who's going to March Madness or something, trying to still go home and do your algebra or whatever the homework is that night. What do you try to do to make that work, to get them to be able to get through while still performing at a high level?
Well, it starts in the recruiting process. Most of the young men that come to Providence in basketball, they all have dreams to play in the NBA. And I tell them all the time, and my coaches tell them, have two dreams. Have a dream of getting your education, and if you're fortunate enough to play pro sports, good for you. But the reality, at some point, your career is going to be over as an athlete, and you're going to make your living off of your education. So it starts slowly in the conversation, but it's got to be part of the dialogue when you recruit a young man or woman. Then you come to Providence, and the culture is education first, education first. So they buy into it. We surround them with great academic support, and that's a focus on it. So we're proud of that, and then that's part of the culture. That's the expectation. We won't recruit a young man that doesn't want to get their degree. A guy like Chris Dunn, who was a first-round draft pick, plays for the Bucks. He stayed an extra year when he could have come out and made millions because he wanted to send a message to his younger sisters that getting your education is important. That's part of our culture.
I'm curious, as I said, we're talking about partly the business of sports at college. When you get into the national tournaments has been happening for Providence College, do you see a bump in overall admissions inquiries, kids applying, including non-athletes, because they just, the amount of attention a school gets by getting into one of those tournaments? Is there that spillover factor? Yeah,
there's a complete correlation. Our admission numbers are at an all-time high, and you can look all the way back to Boston College with what they used to call the Flutie effect. When they won that Orange Bowl, it went off the charts. If you look at Villanova, if they were getting 15,000 applications a year, they're way up over 40,000 now because of 2 national championships. Every single one of our games on national television. When you make it the NCAA tournament, it's a big deal. There's a lot of eyeballs on it. So there's no question the correlation between having success in sport and your national profile and general student population changes.
What do you think about the debate over paying college players? It comes up a lot. You hear it a lot. You hear arguments on all sides. What are your thoughts today on that discussion?
I think if you did that, you'd have to cut most of your programs. There's only one sport at Providence College that makes money, and that's basketball. At other schools, it might be basketball and football. That's it. So if you had to start paying those, you'd get down to the minimum. So it would take away opportunities for a lot of young men and women's programs. We give them what's called a cost of attendance. So every year we're allowed to give our student athletes an additional $3,500. But if you think about it, the student athlete at Providence College, just the tuition admissions alone plus travel is well over $100,000. They're traveling on chartered planes, they're eating good meals. So, the general population, family of 4's average income is what, $40,000 a year? So if a student athlete is getting $100,000 worth of value, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good payday. So should we give them more? Probably, but I think you'd put the college sports as we know it out of business if you started paying everybody.
So you've been at PC, as we talked about, since 2001. When you look ahead now, you've made all these investments in your facilities. You have coaches with longer tenures who've been getting to build the programs themselves. When you look outward from, we're sitting here in the fall of 2018, what are you enthusiastic about? What do you see as the next challenge on the horizon?
Well, I'm enthusiastic that I have great leadership from the trustees to my president to my coaches. So we've got a culture of success right now. The threats for us, obviously, we get a lot of money from Fox to televise our games. The next iteration of that contract negotiation, because young people are decoupling, they're not watching games as much, the numbers are going down, whether you can make that kind of money. And also the issues relative to what's going to happen with the national profile of these sports. They're looking at what's happening with basketball right now. They've got an investigation, and if it turns out there's more negativity around that, does that mean less people will watch the games? And then the stock market, right? It's at an all-time high. Our donors used to be able to write off their tickets if they get great tickets. They can't do that anymore. We haven't seen a drop-off, but if the stock market goes down, we're not going to be able to raise the kind of money because people aren't going to have the same kind of resources. But I just stay focused on the day, do the best I can today, and I think the future will take care of itself.
I think basketball's going to March Madness again?
I guarantee it. 6 in a row.
Guarantee.
I made Ed a little nervous, but trust me.
We have it on tape. Remember, we're going to roll this again next spring. We see what happens. Bob Driscoll, thanks so much for joining me. Stick with us, though. When we come back, we're going to talk to the head of the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network about what's going on in that industry, one of Rhode Island's most famous. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and now as I've been plugging, we're going to talk about textiles, and no one better to join us on that conversation than the president of the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network, Michael Woody, who is also CEO of a textile company, Trans-Tex. Michael, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome, Ted.
So we have some show and tell, and we're going to do that in a little bit.
Yes, we will.
But before we start, I want to remind people, there'll be people watching who they know textiles is important and has been to Rhode Island's history, and they're vaguely aware of what it is. Remind people, this goes all the way back to Slater Mill, why textiles is such a crucial part of the Rhode Island economy story.
Well, textiles are a legacy industry in Rhode Island, Ted. The U.S. Industrial Revolution actually began at Slater Mill in Pawtucket, and as did the textile industry. So the textile industry that began here in Rhode Island was the beginning of the U.S. Industrial Revolution. So it's a legacy industry here in Rhode Island, and something that we need to preserve and strengthen.
So it's no secret that the industry suffered a really sharp decline in the early 20th century. We're talking a long time ago now when this really happened, but there was a big decline. That said, the industry never disappeared, and there are companies that have continued to do textiles to this day, as we're going to talk about. How much textile manufacturing remains in Rhode Island today, as we talk in 2018?
Well, there's still 70 textile companies here in Rhode Island, Ted, and it represents 2,500 jobs. So it's a big industry still here in Rhode Island. Yes, we've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, but the textile companies that have survived the massive offshoring of the 60s and 70s and have gotten through the Great Recession are lean and mean companies, and they're far more involved in advanced textiles than most people realize.
Well, and I'm going to go to the show and tell then on that, because we can give people an example. So we have a shot, and I know they're going to take it in a second. You brought a second guest, I'll say. His name is Dave.
Yeah.
He is a mannequin that we have here on set. There, people are taking a look at Dave right now. You can see him on the screen there. What are we looking at, and what does it have to do with Rhode Island textiles?
Well, Dave is a dummy, but he's smart enough to know that when he wades into a riot, he has to wear proper tactical gear. So Dave was made by John Cato at Amerizone in Cranston, Rhode Island. And this suit is actually designed for combat training to protect against full force blows, including knives, for example. It's currently being used by the military in the Middle East. And the textile for the uniform is woven with stainless steel thread. That's what makes it cut resistant. It's also antimicrobial and fire resistant. The mesh lining will wick away perspiration, so it still allows the fabric to breathe. It uses a total of 8 kinds of textiles and parts from American Cord and Webbing and Woonsocket, some textile fabrics from Northeast Knitting in Pawtucket as well. So this is the type of apparel that Rhode Island textile companies are manufacturing, not T-shirts.
I was going to say T-shirts, scarves. People think of that with textiles. No. This is textiles too, what we're looking at on screen right there.
Correct.
So talk about what you mentioned a few there. What are some of the other significant textile companies around making these days that has kept them successful?
Oh, there are a number of them. Too many to mention, but companies like the Cooley Group, Concordia, Fiber, Hope Global, Kenyon Industries, a lot of them have been here for over 100 years. And they're still strong, still thriving.
And your company, Trans-Tex, is of course a textile maker. To tell us a little about your own company, what you guys do.
We manufacture commercial goods, so the products we make are not advanced. Our business model is advanced. We manufacture things like lanyards, wristbands, headbands. We do strapping for shopping carts. But the thing about Trans-Tex is that our business model is advanced. So we do things with very short, customized production runs, very fast, quick turnaround time, and high quality, safe products.
I'll tell you candidly, a lanyard, for example, that sounds like just the kind of thing that so many companies lost to China, where they could compete so cheap. How, especially then for your company, how have you continued to make a lanyard in Rhode Island that works financially when there's so much competition from offshore?
We compete directly every day with China, and the reason we're able to beat them is we focus on those 3 principles: fewer, faster, finer. Again, fewer meaning shorter, more customized production runs, faster, 24-hour, 48-hour turn, and finer, good quality, safe products. China can't compete with that.
I'm also curious, just before we go on to the Textile Innovation Network, the tariffs. You know, we talk about China right now. We're talking in October 2018. How has the tariff discussion or the tariffs that have come in place impacted textiles in Rhode Island, if at all?
Well, most of the textile companies in Rhode Island are prime U.S. manufacturers. So the tariffs in general can be good for U.S. manufacturing companies. I would like to see it more on end products as opposed to inputs. Sometimes if the tariffs are on input parts, that's not as effective for Rhode Island textile manufacturers, for example, rather it be on end products.
So you think there's a different way to do it that you think, though, could benefit manufacturers here?
Absolutely, definitely. Yes.
So let's talk about the Textile Innovation Network. You're president of this group. It's been formed to help the industry. Tell us a little, how did it come about? What's the goal of having this network?
We came about due to the push of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who was very instrumental in getting us started. He actually rallied.
He can be pushy.
He rallied the textile companies together back in late fall of 2016, and he kind of pushed us to say, you know, textiles are important to Rhode Island. Let's get an industry cluster together to make sure that we keep textile manufacturing in Rhode Island. So about 3 months later, we had our first organizational meeting. We received funding from the Department of Labor and Training and from the Commerce Corporation about a year ago, and we just had our official launch last Monday at Slater Mill in Pawtucket.
So what are you hoping to, you get together, you can talk, you can discuss issues. What's your grander plan for what having an industry group, and maybe, why the Senator thought this could be helpful as well for the textile industry?
Key to success for us, Ted, is not only working with fellow textile companies. We are collaborating with URI, we're collaborating with RISD, we're collaborating with the Chafee Center at Bryant. So by collaborating with universities, it presents a number of great R&D opportunities. We're also working with Polaris, MEP, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. We've had a great...
Christian Cowan, we've had him on the show.
Yeah, we had a great relationship with the Rhode Island Manufacturers Association, Dave Chenevert.
Yep.
So,
also a former guest. Yeah.
So we're all about collaboration as opposed to simply just the textile companies trying to come together.
So any successes so far? I know you just had the official launch, but you have been working for a while on this. What are you feeling good about?
Well, I'm feeling really good about our website. I mean, if you go to www.ritin.org and take a look at our website,
right?
ritin.org, take a look at our website. I particularly ask folks out there in the audience to take a look at the videos. We have videos of 3 textile workers, and if you listen to what they have to say, I think folks will realize that our textile companies here in Rhode Island are not just creating jobs, we're creating careers. Hourly and non-supervisory textile workers make 136% more on average than people who work in a retail store, for example. So there are great textile jobs out there, great textile careers out there for young folks who are interested.
Have you been able to find the workforce you need to continue that? I hear from manufacturers often coming on the show that when these industries were much larger in Rhode Island, everywhere you turn there was a worker with some experience, and now as it's a narrower group of companies, it can be harder to find people who are prepared to come in.
That's a great question, Ted, and one that when we surveyed our textile companies, one of the first things that they mentioned to us is, how do we close the skills gap? So in our conversations, we came up with an idea that Sheldon Whitehouse actually has taken in order to create national legislation for a job training program that would pay a company to use a retiree to train their replacement. So it's a much more rifle shot approach to training than you typically see with job training programs. Most job training programs, they're very general in terms of general skills. This is a very rifle shot.
Only about 30 seconds left. What do you think is the biggest opportunity right now for the industry?
Biggest opportunity for us is to continue to go down the path of partnering with our colleges and universities, creating great new products. I've got another example of that I can show you folks a little bit later, but for us it's about advanced textile manufacturing. Again, not t-shirts. And by partnering with the colleges and universities, we think we can do that.
All right, we'll have you back on for that next show. Until Michael Woody's president of the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network and CEO of Trans-Tex. Where is Trans-Tex?
Trans-Tex in Cranston, Rhode Island.
Cranston, Rhode Island. All right, so we got a lot of companies still doing textiles here. Samuel Slater would be proud. We'll remember, you can catch this episode and every episode of Executive Suite on WPRI.com. We'll see you back here next week.